You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com. What they are doing is putting people who have a proven history of denying election results right where they can do the most damage. And they are doing this in the exact places where Democrats gather the most votes. Think of Fulton County and DeKalb County, the big blue islands in a mostly red sea. These counties are the lifeblood for any Democratic win in Georgia. If you strip away enough votes from those counties or slow the counting or block the certification of the results, you can tilt the state any way you want. This is not just some far-fetched fear. They are literally putting people into these election boards who have already shown that they are willing to mess with the process. One guy in particular loves to file huge piles of voter challenges, basically saying, "I do not think this person should be allowed to vote." Another guy was so far out there that even a judge said, "You know what? No, you cannot have that job." Now, the local Republican Party is so desperate that they are actually suing when their preferred troublemakers get turned down. So in Fulton County, the Republican Party filed a lawsuit because they want to force the county to accept people who already refused to certify elections in the past. They want them back on the board. Imagine that. They lost before, but instead of rethinking their approach or appealing to more voters, they are choosing to lean harder into stopping the vote from even counting in the first place. To understand how big a deal this is, you need to know how Georgia works during an election. Let us look at some numbers. In the last major election, the Democratic side pulled in 70 to 80% of the vote in these two key counties. That is massive. It is why the Republicans lost the state. And they know that if they can gum up the works in just these two places, they can flip the outcome without needing to convince anybody new. If you ever wonder how far they will go, just remember this. These folks have already refused to certify results before. They did not hide it. They did it out in the open, and they are betting they can do it again. This is not about tweets or wild talk on cable television. This is real. This is not just threats. This is happening right now, and you can feel the fear driving it. The Republican Party in Georgia is terrified. They know they are out of step with what people want. They know they are not growing, so they cling to the tools they still have, which is control over the rules. If they cannot win fair, they will try to win unfair. And if you think this is just talk, remember that they are also openly trying to get control over Atlanta's airport. That sounds weird, but that airport is huge money and huge power. Whoever runs the airport gets a lot of influence. So it is not just about votes. It is about power wherever they can find it. And some of these folks are so brazen that they talk about sending in the National Guard if they do not like how the votes go. Think about that for a second. This is stuff that not that long ago would have sounded like a fantasy or a conspiracy theory, but it is not. It is just their plan. It is all about never having to accept defeat again. People might think, oh, they would never really go that far, but they already have. When someone refuses to certify an election because they do not like who won, they are not just playing games online. They are actively trying to keep their side in charge, no matter what the voters want. And this is not just about Georgia. Other states are watching and learning. If it works here, it can work anywhere. Stay with me because there is a bigger picture here. A lot of people get nervous that someday there will just be no elections anymore. But really, they do not have to cancel elections outright. That would be too obvious, too messy, too dangerous for them politically. They do not have to. Instead, they keep the show going. They still hold the vote. People still stand in line. People still mark their ballot. But behind the scenes, they stack the deck. They put the vote counters and the board members in place so that if the vote does not go their way, they can just refuse to count it or refuse to finalize it or stall until courts step in and hand it to their side. Some folks do not want to see it. They say surely they would not do that. Well, history says they would, and they have. Remember, the top court in this country already stepped in and swung an election once decades ago. And the court has only gotten more tilted in their favor since then. So the path is there, the plan is there, and the fear that fuels it is there too. The last part of this is so important to remember. This is not an abstract idea. They have done it before. They are doing it now. And if they get away with it, they will do it again. If that does not worry you, it should. Because the real danger is not that they cancel your vote entirely. The danger is that they make your vote worthless while pretending everything is normal. So let us dig deeper into what this really means for the people who live in Georgia, especially in places like Atlanta. Atlanta is not just any city in the South. It is the heartbeat of Black culture, Black business, Black music, Black history. It is a place where different communities live side by side, build businesses, raise families, push culture forward. It is vibrant and alive in a way that makes some people very uncomfortable. They see all that diversity and power packed into one city, and they want to control it or break it up, or just plain make it harder for people there to steer what happens in the rest of the state. When you hear people joke that Atlanta is like an island sitting in the middle of Georgia, they are not wrong. If you drive out from the city, you will quickly find yourself back in deep Southern territory, old power structures that have never really gone away. And so when Atlanta flexes its political muscle, that old power gets nervous. It wants to pull that muscle apart, weaken it, box it in. That is why you see all these tricks about who can vote, when they can vote, how long they have to stand in line. They even tried to make it illegal to give people water while they waited in line for hours. Think about that. They could not convince people to vote their way, so they tried to make it physically harder to stand in line to vote at all. Who does that hit the hardest? Poor people, older people, people who live in dense neighborhoods that do not have dozens of polling places. People in Atlanta. It sounds petty, and it is petty, but it works. Slow things down just enough. Throw away just enough ballots. Make just enough people give up and stay home. All of it piles up to shift an election by just a little bit. And sometimes that is all you need to flip a whole state. And when you hear people get frustrated about this, when you hear them say out loud that it feels like they are stuck in a cycle that never ends, they are not exaggerating. It really does feel like forever. Once you make that deal to mess with democracy to keep power, you have to keep doing it again and again. If you stop, you might lose that power forever. So you just keep paying the price, keep bending the rules, keep telling lies about what you are doing. And this brings us to the so-called integrity folks they keep putting on these boards. They call themselves guardians of election integrity. What they really mean is they guard the party from losing. They are not there to help you. They are not there to protect your voice. They are there to protect the party's grip. And when they find a person who has already proven they are willing to throw out votes, block certifications, sue people, they snap them up and say, "Hey, perfect, come join the team." Now we can point to you and say we care about the rules, while what we really care about is rigging the game. And the funny, sad part is, this only seems to happen in certain neighborhoods. When these so-called integrity warriors go hunting for phantom voters or suspicious people who should not be on the rolls, they always somehow end up in the same places. They do not look in the nice suburbs full of old money. They do not show up knocking on doors out in the rural counties where people quietly vote the same way their parents and grandparents did. They show up in the city, where people of color live, where immigrants live, where working people live packed close together. That is where they find their problems. That is where they think democracy needs to be cleaned up. People see this for what it is. It is not subtle. Atlanta has been called Chocolate City for a reason. It is a majority Black city. It is proud of that, and that pride makes it a target. If you can keep Atlanta from flexing its numbers at the ballot box, you can keep Georgia red even when more people want it blue. It is really that simple. And then there is this thing that nobody likes to talk about, but everyone knows deep down. There are people who just cannot stand the idea that a Black city can decide who goes to the White House. They do not say it quite that way out loud, but every move they make says it for them. And instead of having that hard conversation, they hide behind all these made-up claims of fraud and fake voters and ghost ballots. It is the same old playbook, just with a modern name. And it never ends. Because if you admit what you are really doing, then you have to face who you really are. And that is too hard for them. Now, there is another layer to this that people forget. Even if you do manage to push back, Even if you fight every challenge in court, even if you get the votes counted, the damage is still done. People lose faith. People start to believe their vote will not count. People decide, why stand in line for 6 hours if they are just going to find a way to toss my ballot anyway? That is the deeper danger. Not just the ballots they block, but the hope they drain out of people along the way. So, yeah, you can see where this is going. It is not just about Georgia. This is the test run. If it works here, you can bet it will show up everywhere. If you can make an election look fair while making it impossible to win, you have figured out the cheat code for democracy. You get to keep the costume. You keep the signs, the ballots, the news shows counting votes late at night. But the results are baked in long before the first voter even walks through the door. This is what some leaders dream about, because it is so much cleaner than canceling elections outright. No soldiers on the street corner, no tanks, just quiet people behind desks doing the work for you. Rubber stamps, rejected ballots, lawsuits that drag out so long the results get tossed. And if the courts step in, they already know how that goes. The top judges in this country already showed they are willing to step in and swing an election if they want to. They did it before, and they could do it again with less blowback than ever. So that is the plan. Not a coup with guns, a coup with clipboards. So now, with all of this laid out, think about what happens when the next big election rolls around. Imagine that it is election night in Georgia. People in Atlanta line up. They wait for hours, maybe in the rain, maybe standing there until after midnight just to mark their ballot. They do it because they still believe it matters. They do it because their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents fought for the right to do it. And when the counting starts, the numbers roll in, just like always. Those big blue counties flip the board from red to blue. The state leans toward the Democrats. But then, behind the scenes, the people who were handpicked to oversee this whole thing, people who already proved they do not care what the voters want, they get to work. They find just enough confusion to stop the count. They say, well, we have questions about some ballots. We need more time. Then they say, well, now we have a lawsuit. Now we have more lawsuits. Now we have challenges about who should be allowed to vote here at all. And while the lawyers bicker, the deadlines slip by. Other states move on. The news channels talk about uncertainty. And right there, sitting in the middle of all of it, are a handful of people with the power to decide whether or not to certify those votes. If they hold out long enough, they can say, well, it has been too long. We cannot wait forever. The courts step in and say, well, if you cannot finalize it, then we have to decide. And guess who they decide for? Not the people standing in line at midnight. Not the folks who carried their kids to the polling place after a double shift. Not the families that scrape together rides because they do not have enough polling places in their neighborhood. All of that effort goes in the trash because a small group of people did what they were put there to do. Block democracy from working the way it is supposed to work. This is how it happens. Not with violence in the street, but with silence in a meeting room. Not with the National Guard at every corner, but with the same faces nodding around a table, pretending they are protecting the system when they are breaking it from the inside. And the wildest part is that it does not even have to work everywhere. Just a few places, just a few counties, just enough to tip the balance. And if you think this sounds dramatic, remember, this is the plan. It has already started. They are not even really hiding it. They tell you with their picks for the election boards. They show you with the lawsuits. They prove it every time they reject someone for having the nerve to want every vote counted. And they do it with a grin because they know so many people will shrug and say, well, it cannot really happen here, not in this country. But ask yourself this. If you knew you could lose the next election fair and square, and you knew your party was shrinking in the places that decide the big races, and you knew you could slow it down just enough, would you let go? Or would you dig in deeper and call it integrity? Would you stand there with a straight face and say, we are just asking questions? We are just making sure everything is fair. When really, you are making sure it is impossible for the other side to win. This is the lesson people have learned in Georgia. It is not new. It is just a fresh coat of paint on the same old machine. Control who gets to vote. Control how the votes get counted. Control who gets to say the counting is done. Control who gets to say those votes are real. And when that is not enough, drag it out until the courts, packed the way you want them packed, get to decide what the outcome will be. And then you stand back and tell everyone, see, the system worked. No tanks in the streets, no soldiers knocking at the door. Just a quiet room with a few people who smile and sign a paper that says, sorry, you lost. And for the people who fought to get that vote counted, who stood in line, who knocked doors, who made phone calls, it is a gut punch. But even worse, it makes the next time feel pointless. That is the real goal. Make people so tired, so sure it does not matter, that they stop trying. Because if enough people stop trying, you do not have to block the votes anymore. They never get cast in the first place. So watch how they do it. Look at who they pick. Watch what they say when they lose. Watch what they do to make sure losing does not happen again. They are telling you the playbook. They are showing it to you every day. And the question is, will enough people see it for what it is and stand up to stop it, or will they just hope someone else does it for them? That is what it all comes down to. If democracy really matters to you, you have to see how fragile it is when people in power think they can hold it hostage with a handshake and a half smile and a little piece of paper that says, sorry, we are not counting your vote this time. That is what makes Georgia matter. It is not just a state on a map. It is a test. If they can pull it off there, they can pull it off anywhere. And that is where we are right now, watching, waiting, hoping people do not give up, hoping people still stand in line, hoping people still believe their voice counts even when the people who hate that voice try to silence it over and over again. That is where the fight is. Not just at the ballot box, but behind the door where they decide if your vote even matters at all.